Hello, everyone. Welcome to our second session of Standing Together, Prayer, Presence, and the Power of Community. This is a webinar series exploring high holiday themes, and it's especially connected to our new JTS High Holiday Reader. This reader was created as a supplement to your high holiday experience. It's something that you can use to prepare for the high holidays, as we're doing right now, but it also is something that you could use to create during your service, so that as you're kind of maybe losing your place, that this can help you maintain focus by pointing you towards specific highlights and elements within the service itself. Today, we're going to be looking at one of the central pieces of the service, the Amidah, and particularly the Uvachen prayers. And I'm very excited to welcome back Dr. David Kraemer, who's been one of our kind of most regular teachers in this webinar universe. So I'll introduce him a little bit later. You're going to have kind of some things in the chat with the schedule of the series. We have one session after this. Recordings are going to be available, and also the link to the reader itself. I want to thank Amy Werman for sponsoring at the Chacham level in honor of your mother, Rabbi Marilyn Werman. Thank you all for being part of this community and supporting community learning. We really appreciate it, and you make these sorts of things possible. There are multiple sponsorship levels available, and if this isn't the series for you, we're starting another series on October 20th. So next week I'll have information for that, or in our last session I'll have information about that. I also want to potentially welcome, we have a group that's zooming in from Baltimore, from North Oak retirement community. So we are delighted to welcome them today. And finally, let's get into the program. The title of this program is Jews, Non-Jews, and the Purpose of the High Holidays. And our speaker, as I said, is Dr. David Kraemer. He's the Joseph J. and Dora Abbell Librarian and Professor of Talmud and Rabbinics at JTS. He's been a part of the JTS community since his graduate studies in 1977. And his focus as a professor is on the literary analysis of rabbinic literature, rabbinic ritual, and the social and religious history of Jews in late antiquity. His most recent book is called Embracing Exile, The Case for Jewish Diaspora. And as I said, this is what Dr. Kraemer wrote in response to the question I posed to him about where do you find hope and meaning as we're preparing for this specific high holiday, as we prepare for 5786. And I found his response to be incredibly compelling, because I think we're in a place of introversion and introspection, and I appreciated that this was a place of looking for broader communal appeal and finding that not just in a source, but looking to it as a historical reckoning, at least in my take. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Kraemer. If you have questions that are of the content nature, please send those my way. We'll be taking questions a little bit in the middle and at the end. And then if you have technical questions, please share those with my colleague, Tani Schwartz-Herman. Thanks so much. And Dr. Kraemer, take it away. Oh. You have to unmute yourself. I'm sorry.
No. I did try to unmute. It said you had to do it for me.
Yeah,
And so there I was. Okay. I muted while you were speaking so that in case I, harumphed or something, that it wouldn't get in your way. But thank you for letting me back in. Hi, everybody. It's great to see you. I can't see all of you, obviously, although the first screen is always the one with people who are not hiding behind their names on screen. And I really, look forward to engaging with you on, very serious question of what's central to the holidays, which I think at least a significant part of the answer resides in the text that I'm going to share with you. Ellie, are you going to take the questions from yes? Okay. So I'll stop a couple of times in between, or if you want to, just, go like that and say it's a good time for questions because you've gotten a bunch, then please do that. And we are going for an hour, right? So with 1 to 2 o'clock, just so that you can all anticipate where we'll be going. So a general comment. Obviously, prayers are central to the Jewish observance of special occasions. And there are, of course, daily prayers, and each and every day that we get up in the morning and are able to do anything at all is a special occasion. I don't want to miss recognition of that fact. But then for the Sabbath, for new moon, for holidays, and so forth, prayer is an important part of all of that, and central to the prayer service always, to the Jewish prayer service as it was formulated long, long ago by the rabbis, is the silent prayer called, the most general name for it, I think, is Amidah, standing, because this is a prayer that is recited while we stand for it. And if we want to understand the way the rabbis understood a particular occasion, one of the best ways to discover that is to look at the specific formulation of the prayer, of the Amidah, for that specific time. So just to offer an example that's not our immediate example, but this will help you to appreciate it. If you, during the week, all of the Amidot, all of the standing prayer, are essentially identical. There are slight differences between the morning recitation and afternoon and evening, but substance-wise, they're identical. Um, and that's on one side. On the other side, if we go to the Sabbath, right? Sabbath prayer is very, very interesting. First of all, there is an additional prayer beyond morning, afternoon, and evening, or evening, morning, and afternoon. The additional prayer is called the Musaf, which is the prayer added in recollection of the sacrifice that was brought at the temple. So that has a specific function. But it's very interesting to look at the formulation of the evening, morning, and afternoon prayers. Now, when I talk about the formulation, what I mean by that is the part where difference happens. The introductory section is fairly uniform. I mean, there are various additions on High Holidays, little interventions, but Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu Elohei Avraham Elohei Yitzchak v'Elohei Yaakov. Those initial blessings are by and large uniform. Where things change is in the middle section. The middle section may be long and various, as in the daily Amidah, or it may be one relatively long blessing, which is the case on holidays, on the Sabbath, and so forth. So the Sabbath is very, very interesting in its difference from one prayer to the other. If you look at the central part of the Amidah for the Sabbath, in the evening, the theme is clearly creation. In the morning, the theme is clearly revelation. And in the afternoon, the theme is clearly redemption. So on Friday night, the prayer references the creation of the world and the connection of the Sabbath to that as creation is completed. In the morning, it makes reference to revelation of the Torah to Moses and the people of Israel, the children of Israel at Mount Sinai. And then in the afternoon, the Mincha prayer, the theme that is enunciated is the theme of redemption, that the rest of Sabbath afternoon should come to a fuller, more permanent expression in the rest from onerous various things, you can fill that in, that will come with final redemption. For those of you who know Franz Rosenzweig, this triad, creation, revelation, redemption, he took advantage of in a very, very fruitful way. But as we think about the Sabbath, as it turns out, is a kind of journey through history, right? So on Sabbath Eve, we're at the moment of creation, right? We experience the world anew. Sabbath morning, we're at Revelation at Sinai. This is the giving of the Torah, right? And the commands for Jewish life throughout the ages. And then at the end, as the end of the Sabbath begins to approach, we talk about redemption, which is as the world comes together, peace is established, and so forth. The Sabbath, according to the commentary of the Amidah, is a journey through the history of the world. Okay, so I hope that illustrates well what I'm about to do, because if we want to understand my holidays, we have to understand the central part of the Amidah. And here, unlike what I just said about the Sabbath, the beginning of the middle blessing of the high holiday prayers, whether we're talking about Rosh Hashanah, whenever during Rosh Hashanah, or whether we're talking about Yom Kippur, it is absolutely identical in each and every prayer. Later on, there might be some modifications, but the introductory piece, which lays out the theme, is absolutely identical, and it resides. It's known by the words which Ellie mentioned before, uvachein, which is a word that translators have had a notoriously difficult time to translate. So what I'd like to do is read this carefully with you. We're going to do a careful close text study and see if we can make sense of how this serves as a commentary on the nature of the day or the period between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And we'll raise some questions while doing this as well. So Ellie, or whoever's doing this, would you please share the text on screen so that I can reference it? Okay, thank you, Tani. Okay, so here's the this is the prayer. I mean, in the Hebrew, it's I mean, this is the traditional prayer. You'll find it being the same in any traditional prayer book. The translation happens to be from the Machzor that most of us probably use in our synagogues and conservative synagogues, but it's a good translation of the traditional prayer. So let's begin. You can see that it looks like 4 paragraphs, but what it is 3 paragraphs plus a resolution. So each of the paragraphs begins, and even in the translation, this is preserved with the Hebrew word uvachein, which could be translated and thus, or and as a consequence, or something like that. There are 3 of those, and then it comes together in the final paragraph. So let's look at the 3 uvacheins. So uvachein tein pachtecha, and therefore, I mean, the order is reversed, but Adonai, our God, instill your awe in all you have made and fear of you in all you have created, so that all you have fashioned revere you, all you have created bow in recognition, and all be bound together, carrying out your will wholeheartedly. For we know that true sovereignty is yours, power and strength are in your hands, and your name is to be revered beyond any of your creations. Now, the translation doesn't do a bad job of capturing what's central here. In fact, it does a fairly good job, but it misses some of the details. So I'd like to quickly reference the Hebrew and ask you whether you read Hebrew or not. And I'm not going to ask for an active response here, but before I go on, in your head, ask yourself, what is the theme word in this paragraph? What word appears more often than any other word? And the reason I draw attention to this is because we've got to recognize that Jewish prayer was, until the invention of the printing press, movable type printing press in the 15th, 16th century, most people didn't have access to prayer books, and certainly not to manuscripts of high holiday prayer books. It was an oral mode, which most Jews heard delivered orally in their synagogues by the chazan, by the cantor. And so what would have stood out would have been the word or words that are repeated. So if we want to understand how a formulation seeks to convey a lesson, what makes the most sense is to actually look and see, is there a key word that is repeated over and over again that might be somehow communicating the message? So if you only have the English here is good enough, and I think you'll get the answer. But if you have the Hebrew, look a little bit beyond what the English does and ask yourself, and I'll give you 15, 20 seconds for this, what's the most common word? What word is repeated? Okay. I don't know if I let 15 or 20 seconds go. Doesn't matter. So if you're working in English, I think you will agree that the word is all. right? And if you were working in the Hebrew, it's the Hebrew equivalent of that, which actually appears more often in the Hebrew than in the English translation. The word is kol, right? So in the first line, kol ma'asecha, all of the things you've made, right? In the second, kol mashe barata, everything you created, kol amasim, all of the actions or events. The fourth line, kol habruim, right? All those who were created. Look, it's literally every line, right? And then the fifth line, Vyasu, kulam. Kulam is a form of the word call, right? So all of them will do. In the next line, the word call doesn't appear, but interestingly, an equivalent does in the word shalem. So this is translated as wholeheartedly, but shalem has a sense of perfection or completeness. In other words, the whole, the all, right? And this is not then repeated in the next two lines, but it does come back in the final line where in the English doesn't actually capture this, but so your name is revered beyond any of your creations. The word in the Hebrew is not any, but all. Again, kol mashe barata, anything you created, right? So the word kol, the word all, announces that is the theme of the first paragraph. Now, if we want to expand that and ask ourselves the question, what is the meaning of all here, right? ALL or all in Hebrew, what is it actually speaking about? So I'll go back to the English here, right? All that you have made, all that you have created, all that you have fashioned, right? And then we go, beyond all of your creations is what the Hebrew should say. This is clearly, it's actually parallel to Shabbat in a way, the Shabbat prayer. This is about creation, right? It's about God and God's relationship to God's creatures created in creation. And more particularly, it is about the fact that there is only the whole world and all of its creatures. You will notice that in the first paragraph, there is not a mention of Israel, not a mention of Jews. There's not a mention of the covenant, of the special relationship between God and any given people, right? Instead, right, there's a discussion, there is a representation of God as the creator of all the world and related to that as well. So the first question we've got to ask ourselves is, and yes, there are other paragraphs coming, but the first question we've got to ask ourselves is, why is this the theme that is enunciated in the very first part of the rabbi's commentary on the meaning of this day? And that is what I propose we understand the prayer as, the rabbi's commentary on the meaning of this day. So why is that so central? Okay, now you may know something about the background of this, but I'd actually like to specify it in a way that relates to some of the sources. Okay, so prayer is one way the rabbis express themselves and asked us to express ourselves, right? But there are other places, of course, where we find rabbinic commentary discussion. And when we look for other rabbinic comments related to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, to the period of judgment that comes with the high holidays, we find that the call here relates to a very clearly enunciated theme in other rabbinic texts as well. So what I'm now about to share with you, listen, it is not in front of you. I want you to keep the prayer in front of you. This is a teaching in the Mishnah being the first work of record of rabbinic opinion and, legal and otherwise. And in the Mishnah of Rosh Hashanah, this is the first chapter of the Mishnah of Rosh Hashanah, we have the following teaching, right? There are 4 times during the year when the world is judged, right? On Pesach for its produce, right? For what grows in the fields. On Atzeret, which is the rabbinic word for Shavuot, for the holiday of Shavuot, weeks. On Atzeret, on Shavuot, for the fruit of the trees. They're obviously very focused on the fruits to be, for the next year. On Rosh Hashanah, now this is the key, listen carefully. On Rosh Hashanah, Kol ba'ei olam, all those who come into the world. And it's not clear whether what this means is all creatures, meaning including all humans, but not only humans. It could mean other kinds of creatures as well. At the very least, it means clearly and unambiguously all humans, not Israel, not Jews. Okay, so all those who come into the world pass before God as there are two versions of this, either as sheep or as troops, and they're very different images. Both of them actually are used in the same Mishnah in different versions of it, right? Um, and then it goes on and quotes a verse where the verse says that God considers all of their hearts, meaning the hearts of all humanity together, and all of their actions. And then it goes on to the fourth time during the year that the world is judged for water, and that's the holiday of Sukkot. But listen to the message of the Mishnah, right? The Mishnah does not know of Rosh Hashanah as a Jewish event. On the contrary, Rosh Hashanah is a world event, and it is an event about the relationship of God with God's creatures, whoever those creatures are, if we assume that what it's talking about is human beings and not animals beyond human beings. Um, so what is it about Rosh Hashanah and all creatures, right, or all human beings on earth that makes this the time for judgment? I want to fill this in a little bit and then bring it back around. So the first part of this actually touches on a teaching that many of you I'm certainly know, even if only indirectly, from our Machzor. The statement of the Machzor is Hayom Harat Olam. You know, today the world was born, literally, but the way this teaching, you know, is expressed in the Talmud itself it's attributed to Rabbi Eliezer, who says that in Tishrei, right, so the month of Rosh Hashanah, the world was created, right? So Rosh Hashanah is the creation day. What's the connection between creation and judgment? Now, to answer that question, I'm going to go to a piece of older anthropology, but one that, in my opinion, remains uh, every bit as relevant and insightful as it was when it was first published. There was a very famous and very influential sociologist, anthropologist by the study, who was a student of religion by the name of Mircea Eliade, who wrote a book that, in its reissued form, was called "The Myth of Eternal Return." Right, and it is centrally about New Year's festivals around the world. Right, so how do human beings celebrate or observe their New Year's? Right, so I'm trying to find a paragraph that would capture this as briefly as possible. I offer the following, though we may have to expand upon it a little bit. So almost everywhere, meaning in societies across the world, the expulsion of demons, diseases, and sins coincides with the festival of the New Year. Just to reverse the order of that slightly, the New Year is the time for the expulsion of evil forces, diseases, and sins. Sound familiar? Right? He goes on that it is essentially the new year, the abolition of the past year or the past time, where all the sins and their consequences build up and need to be eliminated for the world to be renewed. Right? That's what a new year is. Now he goes on. The examples cited in this chapter, right, just mentioned, clearly show that this annual expulsion of sins, diseases, and demons is basically an attempt to restore, if only momentarily, mythical and primordial time. It's about going back to creation, right? That's my rephrasing of what he says. Pure time, the time of the instant of creation. Every new year is the resumption of time from the beginning. That is to say, a repetition of the creation. Right now, I think that's immensely insightful. He does go on to cite many, or a variety, I should say, of cultures, but he does comment at length on Jewish culture as expressed in the Torah's version of this. So if we go back to the prayer, what we will quickly appreciate is that the reason the first paragraph, we're going to get to the second and third, I promise, but the reason the first paragraph begins in the most universal way possible is because ancient Israel, let's call them Jews, understood that the new year, right? They understood it as other cultures did, as other societies, was the recovery of creation, right? It was the casting aside of the pollution of the year that had just happened and the recovery of creation. So when we come to Rosh Hashanah, right, we are literally standing again at the gate of the possibility of a new world. But in order to get there, and he doesn't comment on this in this section, he comments on it elsewhere, all right, it's about the expulsion of sins. Well, how do we get rid of sins, right? Well, we get rid of sins through a variety of rituals. Yom Kippur has a bunch of them. And of course, in order to eliminate sin, there's got to be judgment. And he also comments on this elsewhere, that the New Year festival, which is the festival of the renewal of the world, the festival that recalls creation, right, where all God's creatures, therefore, stand as the created, all must be judged, because unless we are all judged and unless we are able to undertake the commitment to eliminate sin, right, even though we're going to sin tomorrow, but we involve ourselves in that process, then the world could not be recreated. And that's what Rosh Hashanah is about. So start the world anew, see if you can get it fresh, face judgment, because it is only by facing judgment, right, that the sin can be eliminated. But, and this is crucial, this is not something that Israel alone is subject to. It's all creatures, which means that Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, and particularly here Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur has a slightly different valence, but Rosh Hashanah is not a Jewish holiday, right? It is a holiday observed by Jews, but it's not a Jewish holiday. It is a holiday of the whole world, and the rabbis were extremely conscious of that. Again, there's going to be more to say, but Ellie, I imagine there might be some comments or questions here, so it strikes me that this is a good time to take a pause.
Well, one of our participants pointed out that that these three paragraphs are perhaps the oldest additions to the Amidah. Is that something that, and that this is, I know you didn't want to get into the background, but to that point, is there some sense that this is part of a process that, was extant before the Middle Ages? And
well, I mean, the Amidah and its themes goes back, all of the Amidot, right, and their themes go back to late antiquity with rabbinic formulations. I mean, I honestly don't know when this was first formulated in a form that approaches this. I find the work on dating of prayer to be very, very difficult, and those who state conclusions with confidence, I admit to being suspicious of their conclusions, which is why I avoid that. What I'm interested in is the canonical form and its reception, right? This has clear sources. As I just showed in the Talmud, right, and so forth, says clear sources in earlier rabbinic in earlier rabbinic, traditions and teachings. This precise form, we'd have to go back, but how far back can we go? Right. I mean, the truth is that we can only go back as far back as the manuscripts are concerned, and we have nothing that reflects upon this before the 10th or 11th century. I mean, there's a few older prayer books, but they don't have this liturgy.
In the sense of this paragraph, which is providing for this kind of universal holiday, do you have any sense that there is, well, and actually both of these questions are directed in the same universe.
Go ahead.
This kind of sense of having a non-sectarian Rosh Hashanah, or this sense of how we share Rosh Hashanah. And actually, I'm going to phrase this as the way that the questioner asked. Is there an opening, if not a need, to invite non-Jews into the marking celebration of Rosh Hashanah? Or is, and I'm not going to give you, Sue, I think that this was a good enough point. We don't need to go on to the second. Is this a way we should be engaging?
This is a really good question. I have to say that I've thought about that very often, from the time that I came to appreciate the nature of Rosh Hashanah, its non-Jewish essence. I mean, obviously the prayers are Jewish, the language is Jewish, so forth, but it is essentially a non-Jewish holiday, as far as Jews are concerned, right? As far as the rabbis are concerned, right? Exactly. It's the birthday of the world. It's not the birthday of the Jews. So I think that's a very serious question. Before I answer it, though, you used a word that I don't know if the questioner used. Celebration of Rosh Hashanah, right? There are two things that we most often get wrong about Rosh Hashanah. Number one is what we're actually discussing, Jewish versus universal, right? And while we observe it Jewishly, that doesn't make it Jewish, right? In our view. The other is actually captured in the difference between the word observe and celebrate, right? When it comes to Rosh Hashanah, I think we should try to use the word observe and not the word celebrate, because Rosh Hashanah should not be celebrated, right? I'm sure some of you have heard something along this fashion before, but of the 2 days, and I know that for many of you this will be counterintuitive, of the 2 days, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah is by far the graver, more serious occasion. And Yom Kippur is by far the more joyous occasion. Okay, now I know that is exactly the opposite of what many of you have experienced, learned, and so forth. So let me clarify what I mean by that. Rosh Hashanah is the time of judgment, right? I mean, the rabbis are very clear on this. I'm teaching this Talmud, this morning I taught to my Talmud class precisely the text that relates to this point. Rosh Hashanah is the time of judgment, right? And then, according to the Gemara here, according to the Talmud, if you're clearly righteous, you'll be judged for righteousness. You got nothing left to worry about. If you're clearly wicked, you'll be judged as wicked. There's nothing else to do, right? And if you're in between, then the period between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, right, is probably worth your doing tshuva and taking advantage of, right? But, and this is cool, Rosh Hashanah is the time of judgment. When you are judged, when you walk into court, especially if the judge is God, you better take that pretty seriously. This is not the time for frivolity, right? I think one of the reasons we misunderstand Rosh Hashanah is because in our society, New Year is a time for joyous overabundance, or you can fill in the words that you think. We say Happy New Year, right? We even do that when we go to Shul on Rosh Hashanah. We say Happy New Year, right? Shana Tova is different than Happy New Year, right? And it's not supposed to be. Yeah, I mean, this occasion is not a happy one because it is a time of judgment. Yom Kippur, on the other hand, what the word Kippur means, right? And this is according to the best of scholarship on the Hebrew Bible and its relation to this. What the word Kippur means is purgation. Right. So the more literal translation is that Yom Kippur is the day of purgation, where the purgation that's happening is that the sin of the prior year is purged through the cleansing action of the Yom Kippur sacrifice, or after the temple's destroyed, our own actions of repentance and so forth. But the wonderful thing about Yom Kippur, the rabbis describe Yom Kippur as one of the two most joyous days of the Jewish year. Right? One of the two most joyous days of the Jewish year is Yom Kippur. Why? Because Yom Kippur is the day on which the Torah seems to suggest, and the rabbis certainly understand it this way, God will forgive us. And if God's going to forgive you, if the judge says, you know what? Yes, you did some things wrong, but you are going to be forgiven. You are going to be cleansed, and you will go on, right, into the next year. That is obviously good reason for celebration. Right. So then coming back here, if Rosh Hashanah is a time of very, very serious-minded observance, then yes, let's have our neighbors come in and share with them that we are fellow creatures, right? We were all created by the same creating force. We are all responsible for this world together. We will all be judged, right? We're standing in judgment now for what we do and what we don't do. And yeah, then it's time to be serious together, not to celebrate together, right? But to stand in sober self-assessment.
I think we have a lot of questions that are gonna come up about that kind of sense of Yom Kippur as a relief, which
Okay.
I now have this picture of it of like, we're really supposed to be tense in Rosh Hashanah, and like this is the part where you're working, and
Exactly.
almost like you're in your senior, that second semester.
Yom Kippur afternoon, you go out and dance in the fields. That's what the Mishnah says. Yom Kippur afternoon is a time for dancing and making shidduch. So it's, pairing up, young men and young women.
Okay. But
Okay.
I wanna make sure we
But
have time to get to the other two paragraphs.
yeah, so let's go to the other two paragraphs. Now,
Now,
given what I just said, right, and I think we spent an appropriately long period of time on it, right, the next two paragraphs might seem to, or at least the next one in particular, might seem to be a little bit odd because it goes in a very different direction. So if you look, Uvachain, bestow honor on your people, right? Here it's Israel, right? Praise those who revere you, hope to those who seek you. And these clearly suggest that we're talking about Israel here, I think. Recognition to those who await you. I mean, again, given the beginning with your people, the rest seems to be Israel, though it is certainly possible to read this as not Israel alone, right? Those who fear you, those who seek you, and so forth. But then it gets back pretty clear, right? Joy to your land, right? That's the land of Israel, right? Gladness to your city, obviously Jerusalem. May the light of David, your servant. So all of a sudden we're talking about the king of Israel in the messianic manifestation of that, right? And the lamp of your son of Jesse, another, reference to David and the messianic hope. You're anointed, right? So the word literally Messiah, Mashiach, the translation of that is anointed. But if you look at the Hebrew, the end of the line is Arichat Ner Leben Yishai, Mishichecha, right? And they double entendre of once upon a time anointed, and anointed at a future time is quite intentional, right? May that all come speedily in our day, right? So you've got the universal of the first paragraph. You've got the far less than universal of the second paragraph, right? With its hope for messianic redemption, right? That's clear in this paragraph. And then let's look at the third paragraph and put this together. So, and the righteous beholding this, right? It's not the this is a little bit over determined in the English translation, right? What it says in the Hebrew is the righteous seeing and rejoicing, right? It's not clear what they're seeing and rejoicing, but in any case, right? The upright will be glad, the pious will celebrate, evil will be silenced, wickedness will disappear like smoke, right? Excuse me, when you remove the tyranny of arrogance from the earth, right? So if anything, this second paragraph, I'm sorry, the third paragraph, right? I miscounted. If anything, this third paragraph is about full redemption. It echoes the messianic promise of the second paragraph, but it's also different in its formulation if you look at it. So both of these paragraphs have messianic overtones, but the first one is your people, your land, your city, right? And then specifically your king, David, Jesse, and so forth. And then the third paragraph, which talks about the elimination of wickedness from the earth, which is clearly messianic. Nevertheless, is it specific? Is it is it specific to the people, or is it universal? Right? Look at the formulation, look at the words. I think it's fair to say that it comes back to the more universal expression. And is that not, after all, what the messianic hope is? The messianic hope is about the redemption of Israel, but it's not just about the redemption of Israel. It's about world redemption. right? And so when it says in this paragraph, right, wickedness will disappear like smoke, yes, right? The tyranny of arrogance from the earth, yes, we hope that that will stop to afflicting Jews, right? But not only Jews. Again, this is a far more universal hope. So the universal assumption comes down to a more specific, right, concern. That is to say, Israel, its land, its city, and so on. But then, in recognition of where we hope this history goes, it re-expands. And now look at the final, which is the resolution of all of this. You alone, Adonai, will rule all of creation. This goes back to the very, very clear biblical message that there is no such thing as a legitimate human king. Right? Yes, we know David's followers, but if you look at the biblical text again and again and again, right, a human king is at best, right, and barely, an acceptable compromise. It is God who should be king of the earth. Right. And so look at where this goes. You will rule all of creation, where that word call comes back. Right. Al kol ma'asecha. Right. Now it's true. You will rule from Zion. Right. Your dwelling place in glory, and from Jerusalem, your holy city. Right. But that's not because there will be a special Jewish entity there. It's because the messianic world will be centered in Jerusalem, which is the place where God would be found, but it's the entire world. The kingdom is not the kingdom of Israel. The kingdom is the messianic kingdom of the world, and it comes to completion here, therefore, right, with a quotation from scripture, right? Adonai will reign forever, your God, O Zion, from generation to generation. Hallelujah. Not the Jewish king, right? But God will rule, and God, as creator of all of creation, will relate to all of creation and not to Israel in a specific and exclusive way at all. I noted before that this prayer is not only Rosh Hashanah. I've emphasized the Rosh Hashanah relationship of it, but these same paragraphs begin each of the prayers on Yom Kippur. So the question is, why is there not a separate formulation for Yom Kippur? The answer, I think, is because, as you can see here, there is a kind of arc or narrative that begins with creation of all of humanity, of the entire world, in fact. It is universal in the most complete sense. We then, and this is in its way parallel to what we saw with the Sabbath, we then light temporarily on the specific dynamic of the creator of the world with the chosen people. That's the middle paragraph. But then the hope for what will happen in the future, the redemption, the deliverance. And of course, if Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur isn't the occasion for this possibility, there is no other, right? I mean, this is by far the best, because this is the occasion when the creation is renewed. This is the occasion when sins are eliminated. This is the occasion, Yom Kippur, right? When through ritual and prayer, the sin is eliminated and you begin fresh, you begin clean. There's no better time, right, for redemption than precisely at that moment. And so that's what comes in the third paragraph: the righteous, who could be Israel or the nations; the upright, who could be Israel or the nations; I mean, Chassid, I'm trying to find I guess pious is the way we always translate Israel and the nations. All of this, right? Those people, the people who are following the conduct that a human being ought to follow, will see the elimination of wickedness, the enthronement of God, and the end of human governments. And I do recognize that this might have political implications depending upon your individual politics, but I'll say it anyhow. And the elimination of human governments of corruption or wickedness. So, that's the world that this looks for. And I think it's the perfect commentary, therefore, on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, precisely in their combination, because it's the dynamic of their combination that leads us to the fresh moment that begins the next year and allows us to rejoice. This, by the way, explains Sukkot to us. Why is Sukkot described as the time of our joy? Right? For the simple reason that you've taken care of business. And now you can sit back, right? And looking at a new, fresh world, you can truly rejoice. And that's what Sukkot does. Okay, so I mean, I invite comments, questions. I see that there's actually 15 minutes, which is great because we have no way of knowing what direction the conversation will now go. So Ellie, what do you got?
I got a lot.
Okay,
I
great.
do actually kind of love this. I keep thinking about my earliest like writing teacher in college who pointed, as she's directing me to write, a paragraph that you have your, kind of general big, you get broad, you get smaller, and then you come out broad again.
Right,
And
right.
I feel like this is such a good illustration of
It
that
is.
particular thesis. You're like, oh, this is exactly how I was taught to write. And who knew it was being done thousands of years ago as well.
As Ecclesiastes, Kohelet says, there's nothing new under the sun.
So I'm going to tell Tani, if you don't mind stopping to share, that would be great. Because I think we have a lot of questions, and a
Sure.
lot of them are getting into this kind of framework. First is the sense of, wait, what do you mean Yom Kippur is a time of celebration, which is kind of against this way in which we think about a holiday of abstinence, of refraining from eating, and like so much
Right,
of Jewish joy is embedded in eating that
right.
when we're talking about this is joy of in refraining and dancing in fields, which is not generally how we're.
Hmm.
So, what are the ways in which this kind of that we can maybe reclaim that, or is that something that's important, or is it just being aware?
I think it's
Maybe.
crucially important. I mean, I think we really got to redo Yom Kippur, meaning in the way we relate to it and understand it, right? I mean, I think the backbone is there, the essentials are there, but we have misconstrued them, right? Yes, when we do the confession, Al Chet Shechatanu, right? For the sins we have sinned, there's something very sober and even frightening about that. But when we recognize that it's part of the collective ritual of doing tshuva, and doing tshuva is one of the mechanisms for assuring God's forgiveness, right? Then we'll see even that part of it as affirmation. Yes, we have done these things, but we have the power to overcome them, and we have the power to actually influence God, who loves us, who promises us that we will be forgiven, and we're now taking the steps to assure that we will be forgiven. Some of you may know the name Avi Weiss, Rabbi Avi Weiss, very, very well-known rabbi of modern, I guess we still call it modern Orthodox synagogue in the Bronx and Riverdale, New York. And years ago, he began the practice of the following. When you finish during Musaf, the recitation of the service of the high priest, which is described in the liturgy, right? So the sacrifice has been brought, the ritual has been enacted, God has accepted the sacrifice, all of that is described in the liturgy, right? And then it goes on to the high priest's prayer, right, for the coming year. And there are different versions of this prayer, Ashkenazi, Sephardi, other traditions, but it's actually overall a very uplifting and affirming prayer. At that moment in the service, right, in Avi Weiss's Orthodox synagogue in Riverdale, the congregation gets up and sings and dances in large circles.
Hmm.
Right? Because that is the time to celebrate. That is the time of the greatest joy. Because lo and behold, even though we're not worthy of it, even though we don't deserve it, God has forgiven us. And what could be more joyful than that?
Okay, so finding that way to reclaim it. There are a lot of people who are looking at this question in terms of the redemptive pieces, but also the universal.
Go ahead.
And so I'm getting some questions about, what do we do with that last paragraph, which is referencing God and Zion, if this is supposed to be for the whole world, where it seems particularistic again.
Yeah,
And
I don't think
then,
it's particularistic at all. I mean, first of all, God is God of the whole world. That's easy. There's nothing particularistic about the God of Israel, right? On the contrary. And I think, as I said before, that the universalization of the reign of God, which I mean, it's redundant to say that God will rule the whole world. right? I mean, God's not going to be the king of any given nation. God will rule the whole world. And if that's true, if the seat of that rule is Zion, right, then that doesn't in any way eliminate or restrict its universality, right? You still need a place to approach the divine king, right? And of course, in Jewish tradition, that's going to be in Zion, but, don't confuse Zion with Zionism, right? This is the centrality of Zion in Jewish tradition. But even if Zion is at the center, the kingdom may extend to all four corners of the earth.
That makes sense. I think there's other, in terms of, this really is like a way of reconsidering the way we
I'm
consider these two
hoping,
holidays.
yes.
Well, and I
Uh-huh.
think it's interesting because last week, this is kind of building on Jan's discussion of kind of the judgment of Rosh Hashanah and the narrative arc of the holiday. So this is giving us and I didn't even know it was going to, so good
Hmm.
job, you guys, coming up with themes that work.
Uh-huh.
Um, I think there's this kind of question going back to your original setup of the Amidah with the creation,
Right.
the redemption, the revelation. In thinking about this service, which is about creation, or this piece of the service, which is about creation and revelation, does
Well, no, this
redemption,
part is creation, which ultimately leads to redemption. There's actually very little revelation here,
that
which
was
is
the question. Why
yeah,
no revelation?
yeah. Well, I think it's because it's actually universal. Revelation is between God and Israel. It's about the covenant between God and Israel,
Oh,
right? And I think it's significant that there is no revelation here. There is Israel, right? Because we live in historical time between beginning time and redeemed end time. But the occasion, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, is not about the specific revelation of this God in the covenantal relationship with a specific people. And so, I think it's meaningful, and it makes sense in support of the overall theme that revelation is not part of this. Which, of course, doesn't mean that in the very next paragraph after this, you won't find revelation. I mean, these things, there is an assembled quality. Um, it's almost a pastiche, but that's going too far. It's diminishing. I mean, there's an assembled quality to Jewish prayer that you'll have a certain sequence that emphasizes one theme, but then it is Jewish prayer after all. So, of course, we're going to come back to the common formulations which speak about God and Israel and so forth. That's why I began by saying that you've got to look at the special place that sets this day apart. What are the words that are used? That's where you find the rabbinic claim for the meaning of this specific occasion.
I'm particularly struck by that last term in the third paragraph, that the
Go
thing
ahead.
that's going to bring us to this redemptive time is the dissolution of arrogance.
Right.
That is this central. And I think that this is an interest, there's so many things that could be dissolved to bring us, and arrogance is a really interesting construct. And I just, in your study,
Hmm.
does this come up? I know we talk about humility as an attribute, but this is a
Right.
very different sort of,
Hmm.
this is saying, hey, this is the key to kind of redemptive time,
Yeah. Yeah.
destructive of arrogance, and to some extent a more universal time, that this is
Hmm.
like an egoism. So my question here is, you comment on how else this plays out in any other parts of the liturgy? Is this unique? And not to
Yeah.
say you have to know,
Hmm.
where does this fit?
So good question. So you'll notice there are two lines here that talk about what needs to be eliminated, right? Right.
Mhm.
So the first talks about the disappearance as smoke of wickedness, and that's in the most general sense possible. And then you've got and the removal of what's called memshelet zadon, right? Now, memshelet, means, what's a good word? I mean, we use it as government in modern Hebrew, right? So the regime, the sovereignty, some such thing. So, the rule of Zadon or the memshelet Zadon, it's the ruling power that is Zadon, right? So what is Zadon? Um, the translation has tyranny, and it's certainly possible in context, but not necessary. Zadon means intentional,
Hmm.
right? What rabbinic languages distinguishes between zadon, right, intentionality, and shkaga, right, and doing something unintentionally. So what this means is a kind of design intentional oppression, right? In all honesty, I mean, I don't know where this will go in conversation. We don't have a lot of time, but having been in Normandy for my wife and I at the end of August for our summer vacation and visiting sites related to D-Day and the Allied reconquest of Normandy from, Fortress Europe, meaning the Nazi fortress of Europe. And that led us to be rewatching a wonderful French television series that began in 2009, is available over various streaming services. And as I said, we're rewatching it because it's called The French Village. And I think it's 6 or 7 seasons about a French village that is occupied by the Nazis. And when I look at the way the combination of the German authorities and the cooperating French authorities ruled the population, right? To me, that's Memshelet Zadon, right? Everything was so designed to be so completely oppressive, right? To allow no escape from that oppression. Right. When I see Memshelet Zadon now, right, I think of what those humans were capable of doing, but not only those humans, right? So I think what we see here, I mean, the rabbis were very sober about this very simple fact. Human beings, all human beings are capable of the most awful things. Human beings are also capable of the most wonderful things, right? I mean, it's not one versus the other, but we are, right, in our generality, capable of the most awful things, right? The biblical tradition, the rabbinic tradition recognizes that. It recognizes that there is no power, if even Israelite power, without corruption and cruelty. If you go back to the royal histories of the ancient kingdoms, literally every one of them but 2 or 3 is judged to be wicked. These are the Jewish kingdoms, right? Let alone non-Jewish kingdoms. Every one of them is wicked, right? So the only hope we stand. Now, this has its problems too, because if it's the only hope we stand and we don't believe in it, we're in a lot of trouble, right? But our only hope is if these human kings are eliminated, right? And God says, you know what, enough fooling around, let me do it and get it right. Unfortunately, we may not believe that that's a possibility. But that's certainly what the prayer here hopes, is the case and offers as a possibility, whatever individual beliefs might be.
As we're wrapping up, and this is unrelated to this topic, but I think also is related to the idea of turning a new page. I know tomorrow night the library is opening a giant
Ah,
and
okay.
monumental exhibit. I'd love for you to take a moment. I know we didn't discuss this in advance, but I was like, oh, we'd be remiss if we didn't take a moment to
Oh,
talk about
thank you, Ellie.
this
That's the
particular page.
perfect.
Tell
So
us.
all of you, let me issue this as an invitation. Um, Opening tomorrow night and opening to the public on Wednesday and going till nearly the very end of December. I mean, it's closing, I think, on December 27th. The library of the Jewish Theological Seminary is mounting the largest exhibition it has ever mounted in the exhibition gallery of the Grolier Club in Midtown Manhattan. The Grolier Club is a bibliophilic society. It's been around for a long time. They've got a wonderful gallery, and it is sufficient to hold over 100 of the library's greatest works. And you may know that the library of JTS has, when we're talking about rare Judaica, right, arguably the best, collection in the world, and certainly one of the few best collections in the world. So if sometime between this Wednesday and the end of December, come to the Grolier Club, see these amazing works. If you're unable to make it to New York, the Grolier Club is actually putting together an online virtual version of the exhibition. So you'll be able to see literally the whole thing with the labels and the images online. There will be video tours and the like as well that will become available when they are filmed. And if you want to put together a group, let's say 10 minimum, arrange for the group, get in touch with me, and we'll see if we can schedule it. I just have to say that even though 3 months sounds like a lot, it's not, and our calendar is filling up quickly. You can go, but you can go individually. It is open to the public 10 to 5, Monday through Saturday, 4 special Sunday openings. The club is usually closed on Sundays, but there will be 4 special Sunday openings. For details about all of this, you can go both to the JTS and to the Grolier Club websites. And I promise that you will never be more thrilled and inspired by a collection of Jewish works in your life.
I put in the chat the event for tomorrow, but that actually links you to the
Right. The event for tomorrow is a closed opening, and we're oversold for it.
They're oversold.
But look at the other information, and you'll be
And
able
it's
to
here for
follow.
a while.
Right.
I
That's
will
right.
say in our next series, which we're in the process of putting together, Morty Schwartz, who also works in the library, is going to do he's going to pull some of the pieces and talk about some of them as well. So we're going to have an opportunity in this group to engage with it. But clearly there's so many ways to get involved with this exhibit. I highly encourage you to do it.
Yeah. And I wish everybody a Shana Tova. Notice, not Happy New Year, but a good New Year.
A good New Year.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to really think about that every time I'm saying Shana Tova as opposed to, and thinking what that difference is. So thank you for giving me that gift for this.
Sure. It's actually interesting in the Yiddish. I mean, we'll recognize it in the English, but Yiddish too. It's good year, right? It's not a happy year; it's a good year.
Yeah, totally different.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you all for joining us today. We are not meeting next Monday because it is Erev Rosh Hashanah, and I feel like probably a lot of you are busy with other things. I don't know. But we will be meeting the Monday after that on the 29th, and our Chancellor, Shuli Reuben Schwartz, will be presenting on her piece on Jonah from the High Holiday Reader. We hope that you have a good New Year. I hope it's meditative and helpful. And I hope that these 2 sessions in preparation for Rosh Hashanah have helped kind of center you in thinking about what this can be as we're sitting in services.
Bye-bye, everyone.